Hey y'all, and welcome to the Hot Cider channel, which, if my highest view videos are any indication, is your one-stop shop for smartly written analysis on Nintendo's greedy garlic guzzler Wario. Over the nearly half-decade this channel has been in operation, I've had the fortune to write about this heavyweight gold digger a few times. When he ventured into a pyramid, ventured into business, and when he inspired independent creators. I guess you can say I'm something of an authority on the man in yellow. And so you're likely wondering what I thought of his return last year. Nintendo made the wise decision in 2021 to cater directly to its most lucrative audience: aging millennials. A purely subjective statement, but as an aging millennial myself, it's one I wholeheartedly stand by. Tricentenarians were treated to new iterations on titles that made a big splash on the now 20-year-old Game Boy Advance. There was Metroid Dread, a direct sequel to Metroid Fusion that gave the series the closure it deserved. There's Advance Wars Reboot Camp, which remakes the two GBA titles in a refreshed aesthetic. And then of course there was WarioWare Get It Together, the latest in a series that saw it start on this hardware. The thing is, WarioWare has never been just a Wario game. He only programs a fraction of the hundreds of microgames in each release, leaving the rest responsible to his employees. Each character brings something beyond Wario's self-congratulation to these other microgames, usually by pulling subject matters out of their own hobbies, whether that's sports, the natural world, or even old Nintendo games. Over the years, the extended cast of WarioWare has grown ever larger, and have become fully fledged characters on par with their boss, gaining a fan base despite their relatively brief appearances in these games. Get It Together then is a test of a player's potential affection for the WarioWare cast, because for the first time almost all of them have become playable characters. Get It Together once again managed to find an untapped input for Wario's microgames to be built around. After mining the opportunities of tilt controls, touchscreens, microphones, motion tracking and cameras, the developers at Intelligent Systems went back to the source, creating a WarioWare game that is played like a Wario Land game. As in, Wario runs, jumps and bashes to problem solve, whether that's getting toothpaste out of a tube or trash off a table. The individual levels of a Wario Land game are now boxy challenge rooms that change every few moments, matching the manic feeling of escaping a level in the later Wario Land games. The challenge then isn't just to quickly interpret and execute on prompts, but also to coordinate Wario. It makes old-fashioned button mashing feel brand new with this additional context. As stated, Get It Together is also a means for the rest of the WarioWare cast to get in on the action, and that's where the challenge develops further. Rather than each being a new skin of their boss, they all have unique control schemes and limitations to contend with. On one end, video game nerd 9volt interacts with microgames via a yo-yo that shoots straight up, but he constantly moves left and right on an out-of-control skateboard. On the other is his mother, 5volt, who interacts with the world via a free-moving astral projection. If one were to approach Get It Together with a fighting game mindset, the cast of WarioWare could be split into tiers for how easy they make completing a microgame, and a player looking to maximise their high score at all costs will end up picking a reliable team of characters with the most favourable control schemes. The thing is, doing so robs this game of much of its fun. At 200 included microgames, Get It Together doesn't match the groaning collection of hits of WarioWare Gold, and yet the developers squeeze far more opportunities out of these microgames via the over 15 included individual characters and control schemes. Some characters can't move at all, and so hooks and conveyors are thrown into the mix which challenge players to intuit A to B. Some characters can't stop moving, and so the challenge becomes keeping them penned in a safe zone. This is atop of whatever the microgame's original challenge was. WarioWare was already a funny game for its unexpected mechanics and graphics, and Get It Together squeezes even more humour out when a player has to fight with weird controls to achieve otherwise simple tasks. For the first time too, this WarioWare campaign can be played completely cooperatively with a second player, factoring in the Switch's unique hardware feature of two inbuilt controllers. Unfortunately, I didn't get an opportunity to try this mode out before this video, nor the many included multiplayer challenges that harken to WarioWare's GameCube Party remake and even the platforming combat of Super Smash Bros. But these included modes are another great fit for the platform. WarioWare Touched included a lot of toys that could be interacted with via the Nintendo DS's touchscreen and microphone, and in Get It Together all these extra modes are built around its multiplayer setup. That said, there's also a weekly challenge mode which looks to get a little extra out of the microgame setup by turning it into a global contest, connected across the world via Switch Online. As a Wario fan, how would I rank Get It Together in the pantheon of previous releases? Well, if I disqualify Gold for being a greatest hits collection, then WarioWare Get It Together is a solid second place right behind the original. It doesn't hit the highs that the GBA and DS outings did, but it is consistently great. That character gimmick does give the usual WarioWare design a significant remix, and makes an appreciable use of all those strange characters that Wario has amassed since his first outing nearly 2 decades ago. It beats the input gimmick entries of twisted, touch smooth moves and especially snaps by squeezing just a little more out of its control scheme than they did. The only reason that it sits second place is that each individual control scheme is a bit of an over-egging of WarioWare's simplicity. The challenge of quickly reacting with a single button input or D-pad movement is more enjoyable than the additional coordination of each character. Although it's designed in mind for 2 players, I had a great time with the solo content, even beyond the usual stopping points of unlocking all the microgames and getting a solid high score. Considering that, canonically, every game seems to end with Wario bungling his business in some form, it's charming that his employees have stuck with him longer than most game developers have remained in operation. I can only hope that they can still find some new ways to deliver microgames in the coming years. Now, here comes the big caveat you might have expected based on the title of this video. I mean, it calls attention to the fact that Get It Together wasn't the only WarioWare title released in 2021. On a semantic level, it's the only game that came out with that name, but not the only one that came out channeling the spirit of WarioWare. Because the game I think that deserves the crown of the best WarioWare-like of the past year, and one that I rank much higher than Get It Together in this hypothetical bracket, goes by the name of Spookware. Spookware is the most current version of a game that has been developed through several horror-themed game jams. Even now, there's still additional story chapters to be released, but the 4 included episodes in this current package deliver more than enough to be worth a player's time and money. Released in August of last year, it's pretty likely that content isn't too far off. Like WarioWare, Spookware includes an assortment of microgames that challenge the player to react on quick instinct. Despite a shift to the PC, it keeps input simple, either asking the player to use nearby keys or the mouse. Unlike the many themes of a WarioWare game, what ties all these disparate microgames together is stomach-churning horror. Spookware finds its origins in the Dread XP collection, a publishing sampler that shows off artisanal horror games made by small independent teams. Dread XP collections can include everything from adaptations of Lovecraft's writing, recreations of PS1 horror games, and, as is the case of Spookware, goofier takes on gore. This means that in one microgame of Spookware, a player might be asked to chop fingers off a hand with a butcher knife, or scare Dracula away with garlic bulbs. Many of these scenarios feel cut right from the tape of 80s video nasties. Brilliantly, that is exactly how these microgames are presented, within the confines of a television set that keeps changing out cassettes. In Spookware's first chapter, the player works for a marathon of these cut-up microgames as a content binge, a tutorial of sorts to onboard them to the game's weird world of horror. This is to be expected from a WarioWare-like, a high-score driven endurance test of intuiting fast-paced microgames in succession. But what turned Spookware into my favourite WarioWare game of the past year is what happened next. This initial tutorial section is just that. Once Spookware opens properly, you are presented a larger adventure that calls to mind the modern Paper Mario titles. This might be a contentious comparison for many, as I am in the small minority of people who have enjoyed that series' shift away from a Japanese role player into something akin to old Sierra and LucasArts games. The thing is, beyond how it's able to recreate the aesthetics and rendering style of that series, Spookware might be the best case for why these new Paper Mario games are great, because it's completely removed from their historical baggage. Instead of having awkward combat encounters jammed in, instead challenges and ability checks are carried out cleverly by WarioWare-like minigames. Our story concerns three skeleton brothers, Lefty, Righty and Middy, who head off on an epic adventure to cure their eternal boredom. This lands them in interesting scenarios like putting together a school band, solving a murder mystery on a cruise ship, and, in this sampler's final chapter, opening a restaurant in the big city. The main game requires its three protagonists to explore, talk to strangers, and collect inventory like a Paper Mario. But when they're challenged, the action shifts to a unique microgame to overcome it. For example, lockpicking a door transitions to a thematically appropriate lockpicking microgame, bound to a television monitor with a shifting graphics. As the protagonists are TV addicts, this presentation is perfect for how they'd frame solving problems through skills they've learned watching old VHS movies. In fact, it's how the three end up in most of the game's ludicrous situations, announcing themselves as fabulous musicians, detectives and chefs, despite having zero credentials to their name. It's very tongue-in-cheek, and fortunately the humour of the game's writing matches that even when it dips into these spooky microgames. Why I consider it the better WarioWare game from 2021 is that, rather than adhering to the high score driven format of those previous games, it finds a way to give microgames new life through this adventure game framing. Just like there's variety in WarioWare's character collections, each of these microgames is fittingly crafted for each scenario. The Murder Mysteries microgames speedily pastiche Ace Attorney, to recreate abilities like interrogating witnesses, searching for evidence, and piecing together clues. It certainly feels more appropriate than, say, two pre-teen ninjas creating a suite of games based around animals and the natural world, even if that's where their interests lie. It has me excited for what the future of Spookware could look like. Each of the sampler's chapters introduce a new control scheme and extra layer to consider, such as taking timing into account when bossing a busy restaurant, and they never feel like an overcomplication in the way that some of Get It Together's annoying characters do. It has me optimistic how the developers will squeeze new utility out of a keyboard and mouse, and make each new microgame thematically appropriate to whatever the Skeleton Brothers find themselves solving next. Why I think it reflects on Paper Mario is that, rather than menu commands and static readouts, it makes the players an active part of overcoming challenges by turning them into small toys to be solved. Across all the Paper Mario titles, combat is active and reactive in a means similar to Mario's other games. In the early titles, this could be represented by timing an attack, akin to a power meter in Mario Golf, putting in a button combo, akin to a string in Smash Bros., or just nailing the timing. In its latest game, the Origami King, combat is spiced up further by having players solve a combat arena like a Rubik's Cube, so that enemies are lined up to maximise an attack's area of effects. It's the games where combat is more of an afterthought, as was the case with Super Paper Mario, Sticker Star and Color Splash, where it becomes an annoyance, and ends up making players want a more streamlined adventure about talking to NPCs, solving environmental puzzles, and farcical fetch quests. In Spookware, these challenges are, as said, replaced by microgames. It's a surprisingly great fit. WarioWare microgames are simple enough that usually they'll only have a flag as completed or failed depending how a player did. These port well into RPG checks where usually a player character will do the thing or not. Granted, the risk of failing these checks in Spookware is pretty minimal, at least during the main adventure portion where players can keep playing the microgames until they pass. While Spookware doesn't quite dip into it, the microgames do even have some level of gradation so that not quite passed or not quite failed could generate their own outcomes. Although Spookware has absolutely no combat encounters in this early sampler, it does have boss fights. Like the tutorial, these are quick-fire assaults that challenge a player to complete microgames that they've either seen as previous skill checks or haven't within that chapter's familiar interface. It's almost as if these bosses are challenging the Skeleton Brothers on their gained experience. It's a great representation to show how these characters have become more competent, via the player becoming more competent with figuring out and then successfully completing microgames on the par. Whilst WarioWare only challenges a player to hit particular milestones to either unlock more games or more goodies, Spookware cleverly weaves all its microgame challenges into its narrative in a way how the best RPG games do. Before you write up in the comments, I will give some props to the named WarioWare game of 2021. Of course, Get It Together is going to have a level of polish that's afforded by a team of hundreds. There's a longevity to the experience thanks to its high score-driven design that will keep players coming back in a way that Spookware may not. The thing is, Spookware may ultimately be the more fulfilling experience, because of its writing and scenario design, and the clever means it's able to deploy its microgames. Although the three brothers aren't playable individually, they still have distinct personalities akin to the staff of the previous WarioWare games, and I imagine in future chapters they'll develop into even richer characters. And while Get It Together may have Spookware peaked by allowing more players to get involved, I do think that WarioWare has always succeeded as a solo experience, and so combining that with the ultimate solo experience of a single player adventure game is a pretty clever stroke. Plus, it's not like players can't compare high scores with each other like they could in the old WarioWare games, whilst also trading bits of information about each adventure the brothers find themselves on. Perhaps the only thing that could put someone off Spookware is taste. As stated, it does find its origins in the Dread XP collection, and although its microgame content is goofy, it is still pretty gory, especially when it uses real photographs. That said, graphic content has been adjusted with each release, as it's developed from a pure microgame collection into the adventure game it is now. The fact that the brothers don't really do anything gory themselves has me think that this element could become more de-emphasised with future releases, which could be a good or bad thing depending on one's desire for horror. Although I said that appealing to aging millennials is the best business practice, sometimes we want something fresh with the familiar. Spookware doesn't make its microgames more complex or invents a new control scheme to justify their existence. Rather, it reframes these microgames as ability checks in a larger and very entertaining adventure game. In some ways, it's a remedy to the modern Paper Mario games, because vestigial RPG combat is replaced by entertaining, reflexive challenge. It takes lessons from all these games, but manages to make it feel cohesive and very much its own. Familiar, but fresh, just as we all want. Although I'm always going to be excited to see how Intelligent Systems or a new WarioWare developer will be able to find a new input or idea to frame its microgame assault, I think there's an appreciable maturity in seeing these microgames deployed in something a little bigger and more complex. If you're sick of menu-based combat and dice rolls, this might be exactly the remedy you're looking for. It has my mind working on what other genres could enhance stock RPG combat, in a manner similar to Puzzles & Dragons block matching or Undertale's bullet hell defense sections. So if this is the first you've heard of Spookware or just needed a poke, this Wario expert heartily recommends it as a potential successor to last year's Get It Together. If you've played the game and want to share some of your favourite moments, be sure to mention them in the comments below. If you really want to know more about my wonky Paper Mario opinions, perhaps petition me to make a full video on it. Until then, I've been James, and I'll see you all in the next, probably not Wario related upload.